Okay, so today's session is, I've entitled it Driving Engagement with TED, but essentially it's really around one of our new features in the latest update of TED, which is all around email notifications or automations in the system. So the points that I want to cover today are how we can gain momentum with engagement practice. So thinking about where are the key points maybe on the TED journey where we can perhaps nudge the behaviors that we want teams and team leaders to engage with, and how TED email automations might be part of that process. I think with anything, and like we said in the icebreaker that we've done, that there often isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to embedding positive behavior. It's often about a combination of different things, but anything we can get to help the things that we already do. And I know that lots of you already do things to kind of nudge that behavior as teams go through the TED cycle or repeat their TED cycle year on year. I know lots of you have shared some really great practices that you do in your organizations that are designed to encourage those positive behaviors around TED. But the objectives for today are, first of all, to understand some of those barriers, so to understand some of the challenges that we see in engagement practice and in TED. And then we'll look at where we can encourage positive engagement practice. And I suppose the main part of today's session is I'm going to give you a demo of the new feature in our system around setting up automated emails. I'll show you a couple that I've created on our test site. We'll do one live on screen, so if you want to do one with me, or when you get the recording, use that to guide you in setting up your own, then we can do that as well. Okay, so I wanted to start today's presentation by bringing you back to one of our previous Lunch and Learns. So I think it was actually in around January or February last year, and I talked about Tuckman's model, so the 5 stages of team development. I'm sure you're all aware of this. It's in lots of sort of leadership and management training, different things. You might have taught it yourself in different development programs. But essentially what this model says is that typically teams go through this cycle of forming, storming, norming and performing, and then the sort of model suggests that then they come into this adjourning stage where the team disbands, and I suppose long term that's what happens to a lot of teams. And really, if I get my pointer up, TED is positioned, I feel, around this dip that you have here, around the sort of storming and norming stage. And the intention with TED, really, and the way I describe this to a lot of teams, is to try and make that dip more shallow, so that as you're going through some sort of a change, you as a team can understand it better, and you can come together and find what that way of norming is, achieve shared goals, ways of working together, and you can accept the way forward so that you can more quickly get through this dip and move towards your stage of performing, where you become your best self as a team, I guess. So when I talked about this last year, I highlighted that although this model is sound in isolation, the reality for most teams is that this doesn't happen just once, and that there's a change curve that teams go through again and again and again. And it might be that every year they go through a change curve. I think for most NHS teams, it will be more frequently than a year. So it'll be regularly. There are things changing, often outside of their control as a team, and they've got to sort of reform as a team. They've got to do that storming phase, so understand what that change or that challenge is and decide on their new way of working or adapted way of working, so that they're more equipped to deal with the current reality, which might be different from what they've dealt with in the past. So an example of this might have been maybe in 2025, a team might have navigated a change in their team leader. So that might have been a significant change for a team, and they might have got through that. sort of establishing the ways of working. They've built up that relationship with that new team leader. But then as they're looking forward into 2026, there might be other changes or challenges on the horizon that could affect the team. So maybe the team's growing and there's more new team members coming in. Maybe there's a restructure happening, or maybe team members are leaving, and and you've got to find a new way of working. Maybe there's a new system being introduced or a new way of working with another team. So the reality definitely for NHS teams, in my experience, is that this sort of wave of change never ends. So the continuous improvement approach that we encourage with TED is about helping teams to make gradual improvements over time, so that each time they repeat this cycle, they can achieve new heights, they can overcome challenges and be the best team that they can be in their current context. So whilst this model is quite uniform, the reality is some of those waves will be bigger than others. And the intention with TED really is that if we can build this culture of shared learning and development together, that teams will become stronger through their experiences. So today, what I'd like to focus on is thinking about this process. Where might it stall? And we know from our previous experience with TED and from talking to yourselves that many teams do have barriers which make it really difficult to keep up this engagement practice over time. And whilst we've lots of examples of where teams might have completed one cycle of TED that's maybe run really well and it gets them to where they want to be, the reality is that the next wave of change, or the barrier to team engagement, is always just around the corner, and that teams are constantly having to sort of readapt and sort of revisit their approach to be able to navigate this well. So here we've got the typical TED cycle. You might use this in your TED team leader training. And in this cycle, we've mapped out what the typical journey is that a team goes on. So the intention is that this isn't a one-off intervention, it's not a one-off cycle, and that most teams will come back to TED year on year, sometimes more frequently. They'll do it cycle after cycle. They'll become closer as a team and better at what they do with each and every iteration that they go around this cycle. So the idea is that the team will gradually create that culture of psychological safety, shared working practices, and they'll do that through reflecting, through learning, and through sharing experiences together. So when we look at this, I think there's really three phases in this that I see when I work with teams. So the first phase of this is this start to the cycle. So it's often, I think, where things tend to go smoothly in this stage. So particularly after teams have been initially trained, we see that they're active, deciding who's in your team, talking to your team about TED, and then sending out the survey. In most cases is quite straightforward. And it's in this phase where, from our perspective as practitioners, we can provide lots of guidance. We can give teams step-by-step guides. We can signpost them to videos, maybe. We can give them advice. And team leader training is really there to sort of give them the key sort of stages, give them lots of structure around these sort of early stages in particular, so that they can get these elements of the cycle right. And when I think about this stage of the cycle, this is also the area of the cycle where it's pretty similar every time a team revisits the TED process, and that these stages, it doesn't tend to fluctuate from one TED to the next in most team circumstances. The next stage then is sort of this bottom area of the cycle. And once a team gets their feedback in, this is where it can get a little bit more challenging, because it might change depending on the type of feedback that's being received. Sometimes we see teams stall because maybe they struggle to get the uptake when they've initially sent out the survey. So they might be unsure whether they can have the confidence in the results, maybe if they've not got a big enough response rate. in their team survey. Sometimes the challenge might be in the feedback section, where teams might talk about the results, but then I've seen examples in the past where teams might struggle to translate those things into meaningful actions, and that they'll maybe talk around a topic but fail to get to the sort of crux of actually what can we do about this, what are our next steps as a team, and really struggle to think around what are those stages going to be as we work on them over the coming weeks and months. And then I think the final phase on here is perhaps the most tricky one, where we see most teams who do stall get stuck around this sort of time. So here's where the complexity does get greater. So I think after they've created an action plan, it's really hard for us to provide a concrete structure. And part of that is through the design of TED. I think one of the real strengths of TED is that it can flex to meet the needs of different teams, because the reality is no two teams will be exactly the same in the way they approach their actions, the amount of actions they give themselves, what feels right for them. And for a lot of teams, it might be different from one TED cycle to the next. So it can be really difficult for us to provide as much structure as we do in these earlier parts of the process. So the challenge for us as support practitioners is to think around how we can help those teams keep on track with this process when things get tough, or when other priorities come in that might distract from what they've set as priorities with the TED engagement plan. So what our new sort of implementations in the website are designed to do is give you new opportunities to be able to keep teams on track. So to summarize some of these challenges that we see from speaking to yourselves at our coffee catch-ups, at some of these types of events, and from seeing team leaders myself as well, I see some of these challenges come up. So the first one there is that often teams might complete TED once, but then the momentum fades. So sometimes teams maybe they aren't sure when to repeat TED, or maybe I've seen teams before get perpetually stuck on their action plan from their first TED, so they're reluctant to go into the second one until they've completed all the actions. I guess it's that sort of completer finisher mentality. And I think the challenge is that things do change quite radically over the course of a year, definitely in the NHS, that sometimes the objectives you set last year are really hard to get done because new information's arrived, the team's changed, new challenges have come up that you weren't aware of when you initially set out. So sometimes I also think that momentum can fade when maybe a team's had a less than perfect experience throughout the TED cycle. So if they've had a pretty rocky experience through the first TED cycle, there can be a feeling that, well, we don't want to get back into that. It's sort of the very head in the sand mentality, I guess. We don't want to sort of open that can of worms again. And what we want to do is try and encourage them that by doing that TED, you will be that much better for your next TED because you'll have learned from that experience. We want to try and keep teams on track, because what we do also know is that from teams that have revisited it year on year and are maybe in the third, fourth, fifth cycle of TED, that it does get that little bit easier each and every time you revisit it. Next point I've put on there is around competing priorities. So sometimes this can cause engagement plans to fall down. So maybe the list of to-do things on a team's list might sideline your engagement priorities. And I think it's absolutely understandable for NHS teams. Sometimes there are things which are more urgent than your engagement plan. But from speaking to a lot of teams in different types of environments across the NHS, pretty much across the board, they'll agree that engagement is still something they want to drive forward, and they just want help in keeping that momentum, because they know that investing time in engagement will make things better in the long run. So our challenge from a support perspective is to think around how can we keep engagement seen as a consistent priority for teams so that they can keep that momentum, and how can we sort of nudge them towards keeping that conversation going, I guess, that they might have with TED. Next one in the bottom left corner there, I think is more from our perspective as support practitioners. So if you're providing OD support or you're supporting teams with TED, I think I've seen lots of really great examples from different clients in different organizations where you've been chasing teams to keep them on track. You've done things like download your TED data and audited when teams are due for review. So you've been reaching out to them. I know something Lindsay and myself get involved in our trust is reaching out to those team leaders who may not have engaged in TED for a long while, or maybe we want them to think about their renewal, or just highlight some of the support that we put on through events we might put on for team leaders and things like that. So there's lots of really great practice out there, but I think the challenge, as always, is that your OD function, your support function for things like TED is often very small in comparison to your organisation, which might have thousands of people in there. So you don't have the capacity to reach out to every single team, and you definitely don't have the capacity to get hands-on in that support with every team. So what I also think is that the intention with TED was always to try and enhance that capacity that we have from a support perspective. So the ethos around TED has always been to grow that capacity but not drain it. So we want to empower teams to take personal responsibility for things like this, to take ownership of what they work on in their engagement, so that we don't need to be chasing every team. And I think if we can achieve this, the intention is that that will free up our capacity so that we can help the teams that need us the most, and that hopefully that improvement process and the system and the structure that we create around it will help the majority of teams to stay on track without needing that nudge or help from our side. And final point in the bottom right corner there is that I think there are just teams out there who simply just forget to come back to TED. So I think every NHS team is faced with this evolving workload on a daily basis. And even though they might set off with the best intentions for TED, months and years can quickly pass us by. You know, we were talking before I started the recording about how quickly January might have gone, and you know how Christmas is only on the horizon, dare I say it. But joking aside, I think it is a reality that things go quickly, and I think it's more than ever, things move so fast in the NHS, and if we don't take that time to take stock and reflect once in a while, it is easy for months and weeks and months and years to sort of slip by, because we're constantly on that hamster wheel, or for a lot of teams they're constantly firefighting against the next thing. So it's hard to take those long-term or with the long-term in view sort of actions that can help them. So what we want to do is try and encourage that type of work as much as possible. So with these points in mind, myself and the rest of our team, Lindsay and Sam in our central TED team, have been thinking hard around how we can nudge teams towards those positive behaviours that we encourage through TED. So I've made a point in recent lunch and learns, ones that I did last year, of referencing a relevant book or theory that underpins the approach. And I think today's topic of driving engagement made me think of this one, which I did read back ages ago now, back when I was at university, around nudge theory. And the concept involves actions that we can take that might subtly influence behaviours or make choices easier. So the quote there from the book is that a nudge makes the right thing easier, but without taking choice away. And I think that really sort of fits in with what we're trying to do here. So TED's approach has always been to present itself as a support mechanism. I often describe it as it's something that's there for teams, it's not done to teams. So what we want to do is find a balance between no push at all and a forceful mandate of saying you have to do something. We want to find the sort of middle ground that will hit teams and just nudge them towards those positive behaviours that we know can make a big difference. I've got some sort of examples here. You might have seen examples of nudge theory out there. In practice, often we see public locations where subtle design choices might make people use the stairs rather than the escalator. I thought this was a good one that I found on Google Images. You might see ones where there are fast lanes mapped into walkways. So there's no sort of forceful mandate of what you need to do, but there's a nudge in the right direction for what you want to do. I don't know if there's any gents on the call, but you might have seen this one. If there's any gents watching, there's a fly in the urinal as an example of nudge theory in practice. And all of these sorts of things are those subtle types of reminders. And I think more prominent ones that we've definitely experienced might be things like auto enrollment into pensions, or I think there's one where when you're applying for your driving license, you automatically opt in to become a donor. Things like that are those subtle nudges that will sort of move you towards a behaviour that helps in the long run. So the question then becomes, thinking about our TED cycle, how can we nudge teams towards best practice? So I think there's lots of different touch points throughout this cycle where maybe we can encourage or reinvigorate that cycle for teams. And I think there's lots of things we can do with our automated emails or ways that we can influence teams to keep engaging with TED and keep coming back to it year on year. And I think this has been a big focus of our updates and will be a future updates as well, as how we can keep people engaging with the toolkits, maybe the surveys, and really just the TED ethos of continuous improvement, I guess. So what I'd like to do today is showcase some of these new website features. So I'll share my screen in a moment, but things I was showing you are that we've got more prominent follow-ups on the website now. So really subtle changes into the sort of design language that we use on the website. We've got some clearer deadline indicators to make it easier for a team to understand where they're up to, or a team leader when they're looking at the website. But the big one really is this customizable email reminders. And when we've created this, we've wanted to be mindful that you might want to customize this to your own needs, to the way your teams work, and that it might not be exactly the same in every organization. So what we've built into this is the ability to send emails to team leader groups, to team members, and to do that at different points throughout a TED journey. So there are different trigger points which the TED system tracks, where you can set up as touch points for these emails to go out, or to set the clock ticking as to when that reminder might be due. So without further ado, let's take a look. So I'll just pop that up on screen. Can everyone see my web page? Yeah, getting a few nods. Do let me know if you can't see anything. Lindsay, if I can ask you to keep an eye on the chat. If there's any questions while I'm going through things, please do pop them in the chat and I'll come back to them as we go. So if anybody's logged in since Tuesday, you might have noticed some cosmetic changes onto the website. So most of this really doesn't really change the user experience in any way. It's really just a change of design language, as our developers call it. But the first thing you might notice is the dashboard squares that we have here look slightly different. So what we've tried to do here is include a bit more information so that team leaders can understand where they're up to with their TED and make it more obvious of how to do their follow-up. If you cast your mind back to what it was like last week, you might remember that we used to have 3 little dots up in the top right corner, and a lot of the functionality around your survey was hidden behind that. And whilst it made it, I think, quite aesthetically pleasing, it was really clean, really clear, some of those functions were things which were really important for team leaders. So those might be things like quickly being able to create a follow-up, or being able to archive your survey when you're ready for a new one. We've also made the recipients list. We've given that a little bit of an icon so that team leaders understand that that's a clickable thing that you can go back into. So if you want to add a new recipient, it's in there. But I think the most important one is this follow-up icon. So in the past, and I think lots of you have experienced this, we have seen teams come to their second follow-up, and rather than following up on their original one, they're creating a brand new TED survey. And whilst teams can still do that, remember, we're nudging them to do it the way we'd like them to do it. There might be some situations where teams want to create a brand new fresh survey. Maybe they've become a new team, or two teams have merged, and they don't see the value of comparing this year's results to last year's results because there's been some real significant change in the team. But I think for the majority of teams, we want to gently nudge them towards this follow-up icon, which will help them go into that follow-up survey. And for those of you that might not have seen a follow-up survey before, if I just view our support team follow-up here, when you come to a follow-up, teams get the advantage of being able to see their previous results underneath their current results, and on the actual survey you can see your previous scores against your current scores on there. And I always think this adds extra richness to that team conversation, because it helps you understand as a team whether we're in a better place than we were this time last year, whether anything's maybe declining that we should really talk about and really be aware of. And also where there's recognition due for the work that we've done. So how the work that we've done since our first TED last year may have helped benefit us into how we feel this year when we're coming to our team engagement survey. So what we want to nudge people towards is that repeat sort of process. Other little graphical changes which we put on here, you might now notice that we've got the expiry date more prominent. So in there, a team leader can now see the created date, and you can see this as trust admins as well. So you can see on each survey, when was the survey created, when is it expiring, and this is on a sort of that red, amber, green indicator as well. So if the expiry date is a long way off, it'll be green. If it's very soon, like this one, January the 30th, it'll be this amber color, a little clock symbol. And if it's expired, so the survey is closed down and it's ready to view the results, that's in there. So again, another subtle indicator to team leaders that your results are ready, your survey's now closed, it's maybe time to look at your results and start to work on it. So those are our initial sort of cosmetic changes in there. Other things just to make you aware of as admins, which is quite useful when you've got lots of TEDs in your system. You'll also have your filter control. So again, we did have versions of this before, but we've added in a few new ways to sort of sort these things. So you might want to sort things by divisions in your organization, by date created. You might want to show current and expired. All types, so you might just want non-follow-up ones, or you might just want follow-ups, or you might want all types, and you've got active or archived as a different filter as well. So again, these were all there before, but we tried to tidy this up by just keeping it behind this sort of drop down. Okay, next to our main feature. So under the administrator section in TED, so I'm logged in currently as a trust admin. And if you're a trust admin, you'll now get this extra button here, this green one, which says scheduled emails. So when you click on this, if it's your first time here, you'll just see this create new schedule button here. And what this page allows us to do is to set up email automations that apply to our whole organization. So it's important that we think about when we set these up, who do we want to send it to, when do we want to send it to them, and how frequently do we want those emails to go out. So I'll start by coming into this 10-month reminder one. So once you've created one, you'll see something like this on the screen. And well, in fact, actually, I'll show you how to create a brand new one, and then I'll come into that. So if we create a new schedule first, When you're doing this, and some of you might want to do this along with me or replay this video back, but you've 2 boxes at the top which are really just for you to describe what this automation is all about. This first section, section 1, is really just information for you as trust admins, so that particularly if you've got several automations set up, you can differentiate one from another. So what I might want to put in here is maybe let's call this 1 week reminder for team members. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is set up something which reminds team members on surveys that there is 1 week left to complete their TED survey. So we can then give it a description. I'll just call it 1 week reminder. You might want to be more expansive in your own description so that you can differentiate them. But remember, this information is only visible to you as trust admins. Next section then, section 2, is our recipient configuration. So in here, we select a recipient group. So when I drop this down, hopefully you can see that drop down okay, but there are 3 different sort of groups that we can set up in here. So this might be, we could either set it up for team leaders, survey recipients, or even division leaders. In this case, I'm going to set up survey recipients. You'll notice we also have no primary group. So if you don't want it to go to one of these groups, but you want it to go to specific people, you can set that up as well. For this example, I'm going to set up survey recipients. So this is where in section 2, you also get an option to add any additional email addresses. So maybe you've got someone who wants to be signposted at a certain time when certain things go out, or you might want to exclude certain email addresses. So for instance, if you're creating an automated email to team leaders, there might be certain team leaders or team leader groups that you don't want these reminders going out to because maybe they work in a different way, and you know they don't need those extra emails. So you can select to exclude optional email addresses, and to do that you just type their email address into there, click add email or exclude email, and it will populate that list below. Once you've done section 2, we then come on to our trigger configuration. So essentially what we're doing here is deciding what is the fixed point in time during that TED cycle when we want this email to be triggered. So we select this drop down box and there are 3 options in here. So it might be a set amount of time after the survey's been created. It might be related to the survey end date. So that's going to be the example I'm showing you here. Or it might be when a follow-up's created. So you might have a specific reminder that only applies to teams that are doing follow-ups. In this case, I'm going to select survey end date. And then we need to decide on this timing. So under relation, I get some different options. You'll just notice as I do this, this preview will change here. So this is a bit of AI in the system, which really interprets in natural language, actually, what are you setting up here? So under relation, so we've got before or after. So I want to set this up 1 week before the deadline date. So if we come into before, we're going to keep that amount at 1. We could up that or lower it. So let's say we're doing months after the end date, we can put lots in there. And then the unit here, we can drop this down and select weeks or months. So what I'm looking to do here is 1 week before the survey ends, as it says in our preview there, this email will go out. Then we scroll down, you do get a little bit of a tick box there. So if you don't want this email to be live straight away, you can untick this box, but by default it's in there. Again, we're nudging you to have it set up straight away. But once you click save at the bottom of the screen, that email will trigger for any teams that are currently doing TED. So if there are any teams who are less than a week before the survey ends, they'll start to get these reminder emails. It then also shows you an impact preview. So this gives you a little bit of feedback as to how many people will this apply to in the next 30 days. So on my test database, this is telling me that there are 134 different email addresses that will receive this during the next 30 days if I set this up. So it will give you some feedback on what sorts of things are coming in. The others are blank at the moment because it's part of being in my test database, but you can do a detailed breakdown as well, and it will give you more information as more stuff comes into there. The final section then, and perhaps the most important bit, is how you can then customize this to meet your needs. So it will give you some default text. So it's a survey ending, and then it's got these little squiggly brackets. So these things mean we've got a variable in there. So you don't necessarily need to know programming language, although it does tell you the text on this right-hand side in this little information box. But what you can do is change this. So let's call this your survey, and then we'll insert a variable. So we've got a drop down box there, and we want to have survey name. So it'll automatically put the survey name into there. Will expire in 1 week. Okay, so that'll be the email title that comes through. And then it populates some of the email body. So it says the survey, and then it'll have that TED survey name is ending soon, and then it automatically gives the survey details. And again, it's using these variable tags to pull through that information. So it will say who's the survey owner, so the team leader, what's the survey name again, when was it created, when was the end date, and then it'll also give a link to complete the survey. So that can be useful for recipients because it will pull them straight back through. They don't have to go digging around for their original email link to fill that in. So that can be a useful one as well. But this is entirely customizable. So if you wanted to scrap that and pop your own text in, you can absolutely do that through this. And again, best regards, you might just put best regards, OD support team. You might be putting in things like if you require additional support or have any questions, you can get in touch with our email address and pop your own email address in. So you can add those things in as you see fit. So then again, this is a bit of sort of AI in here that generates this text. So this says email content optimized for survey recipients regarding survey end events. So what that's saying is it'll tell survey recipients when the survey is due to end. So it tells you that's contextually relevant. What I then do, it'll ask you to preview it. So I click this little red button at the bottom, and it shows me a mock-up of what that email will look like when it comes through. Tells me at the top what the trigger is, who's going to get it, and if I'm happy with that, I can click on create schedule, and then it's created. So there we go. We've got our 1 week reminder for team members. So because I kept that box ticked earlier, you'll notice it's active. So important point for yourselves as admins, if ever you want to deactivate an automated email, you can come back to it, click that toggle. It will ask you if you're sure that you want to do that. And if you click OK, it will be inactive. So if you want to deactivate something for a period of time, but keep it in there in case you ever want to use it again, you can do that. Similarly, you can edit or view the actual content of that reminder. I'll just scroll down to an example I did earlier. So another thing that I think could be useful is reminders when their follow-ups due. So I've created one that's a 10-month reminder, and our intention is we want people as they're getting close to 12 months to think about doing the next TED. So if we have a look at this one, I've created one that said, okay, it's 2 team leaders. It will trigger 10 months after the survey ends. It tells me when I've set that up and they're pending to go out. And the description, it's an email to team leaders 10 months after their last survey deadline. So there's a reminder to revisit their results and follow up their survey. So I've got a bit of that dynamic text in there. So hello, and then the team leader's name. In the title, it will have their survey name. And the text I put in there is, it's now been 10 months since your team last took part in a TED survey. At the time, this helps create space for reflection, conversation, and small improvements in how your team works together. For the best results, you should aim to repeat TED every 12 months to understand what's worked, what hasn't, and what's changed for your team. Repeating TED regularly helps create a culture of continuous improvement and psychological safety so that can support your development and success. So if you'd like to set up a follow-up TED, you can do so via the TED website, or if you could benefit from support, you can contact the OD team, and I've just made up a support address there. Now I'm going to, if I scroll my screen along, this is an example of that email that I've received to my inbox. So in here, we can see it's got my details in here, and those links that I've put in, it recognizes those as a hyperlink or an email link, and you can click on that so it can be live. So if you wanted to put in a link to your intranet page, if you're offering support, or to an event you've got running, maybe you can add those into your automations. Or if you maybe we've created a YouTube video that's relevant on our YouTube channel, you could link to that in there. So there's lots of opportunities, and we're really excited to see the things that you might come up with as you go. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Lindsay, can I come to you? Has anything come in through the chat that I can answer while I'm on the screen? Go on,
yeah, there's a couple of questions. I think I've answered a couple. I think I'm very happy with the answers that I've given. But Claire has just mentioned, if team leaders and divisional leaders, are they able to set up the automated reminders themselves, or is it just the practitioners?
Good question, Claire. Yeah, so it's only trust admins. So there's only the likes of yourselves who'll be able to set this up. So it's at an organisation level. So yeah, I think what we intend is for you to think around what's that consistent approach you want for every team. So what I'd ask is be really mindful of the types of messages you want to send out. It's not to say you can't set out one that is just for a specific team or a specific group of team if you wanted to specify the email addresses, but really we want to keep that control with yourselves as admins. Hopefully that answers your question. But yeah, good question, thank you. Anything else?
There's another one from Rachel saying, can you attach documents to the emails as well?
Good question. Yeah, so you can't through the system. So what I would recommend is, if you did want to signpost to a document, host it somewhere, maybe on your intranet or somewhere where your team members, team leaders could access it and create a link to it, and you can share it that way through the system. So in answer to your question, no, you can't embed it into the automated email, but you can link to it if it's stored somewhere else. Yeah, good question. Anything else, Lindsay, before I move on?
Yeah, there's just one other point actually, which yourself, Sam, and I were discussing yesterday, and it was the visual look of the dashboard when you first log in. Claire's kindly put a screenshot in the chat if you all would like to take a look at that, and it just shows a completely different layout to what you can see on Lee's screen. You can see each of the surveys, they take up the full length of the screen. So what you need to do just to clear that is just, I think it's a Control and F5 on your keyboard, and it'll clear the cache from the previous software version, so that it'll reset the dashboard so it will then look like Lee's. So if you have any problems with that, it's just a simple Control F5 and it should fix it for you. If it doesn't, please let us know.
Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, really good point. So as I said, the version you're seeing on my screen now, this is the updated version as of Tuesday. What your web browser will do is it keeps cached files of websites you've been to recently. So if you've logged into TED in the last 2 or 3 weeks, it might be conflicting with what you've got saved in that cache. So that's why it looks slightly different. So if you do what Lindsay suggested, Control and F5, it removes those old sort of memory files and will load up the brand new fresh version. It's not something which everyone will need to do. So for instance, your team leaders, that cache does get refreshed every so often. So if it's been a while since someone's logged in, it shouldn't affect them. But for the likes of yourselves who might log in regularly, if you do get a view like Claire has shared in the chat, then Control and F5 will resolve that for you. Claire, would you like to go in?
Just want to confirm that by doing the Control F5 thing, it's just clearing the memory cache for the TED platform, not for like that whole web browser.
Now then, Lindsay, you've tried this, haven't you? I haven't tried it myself. What did it say when it came up?
Yeah, it literally just refreshed the screen. That's all it did. It didn't. It hasn't altered anything that I know of. But I don't save my passwords, so that's something that I won't be able to test, unfortunately. I just don't like the idea of everything saved. I like to manually type it in. I'm very old school that way. So
good question. What I can do,
I'll
double check with our developers. So if you, a bit reluctant to clear that cache,
I'll hold off for now.
I'll pop something in the chat for this channel so that everyone can see it, and I'll get onto our developer just to double check what it does. But yeah, thank you. Fab.
Just one last question, Lee. Sorry, from Kim, regarding quarterly emails being sent out.
Right. Let's get to the bottom. So you send quarterly emails following the closing date requesting updates on progress. Yeah, so that absolutely could be done. Yeah, that's one of the ways we intend for this to be used. So does segue me in very well to my final few slides. Very conscious of time. We're coming up towards the end, but things you might want to use this for is, as I've shown you, when survey responses are due, so that reminder before the end date, maybe a reminder to set up your first TED date. So one of the triggers is in there is after a team leader's account has been created. So you might want to set up that reminds people maybe 2 weeks after their account's been created. Have you set up your TED yet? Do you know where to get additional support? So just that nudge to keep that momentum after training. Maybe you want to send a reminder maybe a month after the survey's closed to remind them about their action plan. Have they done that? So similar to what you're saying there, Kim, maybe quarterly you want to send this. So you might say 3 months after a survey closes, you want to get that nudge reminder. How are things going? Do you know where you can get extra support? Have you any questions that we can answer? So you could set up something like that. I've shown you reminders for follow-up. So what I'll do, I'll share that text that I had if you want to adapt that and copy it and paste it into your own reminder. And what I'd encourage you to do, share your reminders with us and we can share them more widely. So if you have any good ideas of how you're going to use it, let us know. We mentioned available support, so you could put that into a reminder, or a team check-in. So it might be that you set one up for a specific team that maybe you've supported through their first TED cycle and you want to make a really specific reminder so that the system reminds them to check back in with you. Or you could set it so it copies you in on that email as your own sort of automation to say, oh, I worked with that team 6 months ago, let's check in on how they're doing. So lots of opportunities there. I think we've gone through most of these, so I'll very quickly go through them. So things we identified or I sort of highlighted earlier on, low survey responses. So that might be an automation to team members, and hopefully that will help to drive higher response rates and require less manual chasing from team leaders. Use case 2 is encouraging repeat TEDs. So it might be those teams who've completed TED once but aren't following through to repeat it. So automated reminders at different touch points. So you might do it every 6 months, maybe 10 months, maybe 12, maybe all of those if you feel that's right. So have a think about what's right for your teams and your organization. But the hope is that'll give you sustained engagement. It'll help to embed that continuous improvement culture and just nudge teams towards what we want them to do. And final one, TED support. You might be providing lots of support. You might be running events, drop-in sessions, but people aren't accessing them as much as you would like them to do. So you might use your automations to promote those events. So you might think, oh, when the team's 6 months of the way through the TED cycle, it would be useful for them to come along to a drop-in or come to one of our events maybe 8 or 9 months down the line as they're starting to think about their next TED. So you might want to promote those sorts of events and support through the automation, so that can help to raise your awareness and embed confidence in your team leaders. So last couple of messages before we go. Some good practice tips to think about. remember, keep your messaging supportive. TED's intended to be there to support teams. We don't want it to be sort of saying teams have to do different things, but if we can keep it supportive, it keeps that ethos around it. Align reminders with team rhythms. So think about your own organisation, tailor them to what you see fit, and change them over time. If you set up one and it isn't working after 6 months, maybe try something a bit different, change the language in it, change the frequency of it. Maybe think about how you combine it with other conversations and other promotions you have. I think whilst these automations will help, they're definitely not a fix for everything. And I think if you can combine this with your other comms, your other support you're giving, that's where it can have that real big impact. And I suppose the really important one to think about is you don't want email overload. So the emails from this will come from noreply@tedtool.co.uk, which is the same one that survey links go out from, and email reset emails come from. So the last thing we want is team members or team leaders adding this to the junk list. So we don't want to overload them with spam emails by sending too many out. So to wrap up, I think the next steps really are to have a go at it yourselves. Check out the TED website, look at some of the new features. Let us know if you see anything which doesn't look how it should be, and we'll help out in any way we can. Have a go at setting up your own automations. As I said, I'll send our examples to you that we're going to use at Lancs Teaching, but I'm really keen to see what other ideas you come up with and things that we can share and pinch with pride and use together. So really exciting to see what you can do with them. Okay, as always, please do share your feedback. I think Lindsay's going to pop in a link to feedback, or you can scan that QR code. I'm conscious of time, so I'm not going to leave that up too long, but do signpost your colleagues to this video once I share that, if that would be helpful. And just to signpost you to our next event, so it's not long off our next Lunch and Learn, which will be on the 12th of February. I'm planning to go into a bit of interpreting your TED data and some of the spreadsheets, which you might be doing, particularly around staff survey at this time of year. But we've also got coffee catch-ups coming up, and our deep dive will be in March. So finally, just to say thank you. It's been great to see so many of you today, and I hope you're all well. And until next time, I wish you well, and good luck setting up your emails and working with your teams. Thanks.